Hey guys, welcome to the Seven Figure Box Show. My name is Andrew Frezza. I'm here with Carl Penney of CrossFit El Cid, and we are in the CrossFit El Cid offices right now. And I'm really excited to have Carl on the show because Carl and I have been friends and sort of mentors of each other, I guess, in this industry for a while. And just really excited to kind of share our relationship with you guys. I hope that you can find someone in your area, you find your Carl, because it's nice to have someone who's kind of on a similar path, has similar ideas, and it's been very helpful to have someone to kind of bounce that off of throughout the years. So that's what I want to kind of kick it off with. Like, I know what like our relationship is to me. Like, it's very helpful for just like sometimes venting, sometimes like we're just like, I just wanted to talk to you to realize that like I'm not crazy in this thing. Like, that's a lot of our conversations, but I'm curious like what it is for you. What do you get out of us meeting like once every couple months?
Usually I get lunch, which is almost most important. No, it's funny because almost every time we meet, I'm like, we should probably do this more often. And then it's like 4 months later, I'll talk to you, or we'll meet in person or whatever. I mean, you kind of said a lot of it. It's almost like having another person to vent to bounce ideas off of. Sometimes, like you said, it's just to say, hey, this is what's going on. Am I crazy? Am I doing something terribly wrong? Like reassurance for whether things are going good or bad. And it's different than having like a business coach or mentor because I'm not paying you.
Yeah.
But also, you're not invested, and I don't think you're afraid to tell me that's a terrible idea or this is what I would do if I was you. And I know it's out of a place because you want to see me do well, I want to see you do well.
Yeah, I found with like business coaches and even business partners, like you have investors that kind of function as business partners. I actually have my brother as a business partner, and there's more pressure to implement what the other person's saying, where I think we can exchange stuff without the pressure to implement something, and we can really like take that idea and make it our own and implement it, or we can just be like, after a week, you know what, that doesn't click for me, and I can just like forget it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I always say that too, where you have your brother to bounce ideas off of, but I'm sure your conversations with him are very different than the conversations with me. Not that we're roasting Tony at any point. Hey, Tony. But it's a different viewpoint because I'm not as invested. I don't have skin in the game, and you the same for me. That our feedback and our conversations are going to be very different. So it's a very valuable like situation.
And I think there's enough in line with how we view our gyms. We've both, I think, shifted even more into the direction of thinking about the general fitness, the general person, less away from the competitive side over the years. And I don't think either one of us was too competitive ever, but we're moving more and more in that direction because that's where we're having the biggest impact with people.
It's funny because I think we're on a very, like you said, almost like a similar timeline with our development and growth. And it's not always, we're always like one step behind or in front of each other as far as implementing. Not that it's a race, but there will be times I'm like, oh, I'm thinking of this, and you're like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. Or I think vice versa, that happens sometimes. And it's interesting because I think for the most part, we're usually heading a similar direction at a somewhat similar time frame. So it's almost good that we're not doing the exact same things at the exact same time, where I can say, oh, well, we did this. This is what I would do differently if you're in that situation. But I mean, it is funny, like I think our development, our growth as like gyms and businesses mirrors each other pretty well with a pretty similar timeline.
And I think our relationship works pretty well because you're close enough to make it easy to come see each other when we want to, but also far enough that like we're definitely not competitors in any way, shape, or form. Which, I mean, I think we all want to have that abundance mindset where even the guy who's 2 miles down the street is not really a competitor. There's more than enough people to go around. But
Yeah.
I think there's an inherent nature when you're running things like Facebook ads and stuff like that, and you know there's a specific overlap there. You're going to be a little bit more protective when that person's like right down the street.
Of course.
Versus us, we're in Jupiter, he's in West Palm. We're a good 35-minute drive away. We're definitely not competing in any way, shape, or form. So it's nice. We can be very open and relaxed around each other in that sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people I think talk about collaborating and working with your neighbors and this and that. And we're, like you said, we're not competing with each other. We're far enough away that we can be very honest. Like I would tell you any of our metrics, what we've done, doesn't really matter to me. And it's hard to do that, I think, sometimes locally, and it's almost like a fantasy world, I think, sometimes when people are like, oh, you should talk to the people at the gym down the street. And for me, I'm like, the people at the gym down the street hate me and like roast me all the time. So I don't really care. I don't look at it as competition. I just don't really want to collaborate with people who, don't like me. I'd rather work with you that actually does.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your role within the business and a little bit of like El Cid's sort of history. I think a couple things that I really like about you and admire about you is number one, I think you've gotten to a really good place in your business pretty fast. Yes, you could look at the history of the gym before this gym and kind of how that evolved into it, but I don't always see that as an advantage. I think sometimes it's an advantage to start fresh. So the fact that you guys have gotten where you are in just a couple years is pretty cool. And then I think it's cool with you is that you've done a great job of running a really good business and community without having to be anywhere near as hands-on as I am in terms of like, I always feel the need to be like coaching all the time, programming all the time. And that's been always a hard thing to separate myself from. And you pretty much from day one said, no, I'm going to be more behind the scenes manager, leader in that sense. So can you tell us like the role first, kind of where you're at?
Sure. It's so funny. People ask me all the time, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes it depends what time of the day you ask, because I might say, oh, I do everything. I do all this stuff. And then other times it's like, I don't even know what I did today, honestly. So, I mean, my role here is general manager, director of operations. I don't really have like a specific role that I call myself. Really, usually what I do, and I try to look at it as I try to do whatever I can to allow the coaches and other staff members to do their job to the highest ability. And if that means I'm working on like marketing, or if I'm developing new programs, that sort of stuff, that can be what I do. I try to teach our coaches about coaching, communication, being on time, that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't coach any classes. I don't think I've coached classes at all in 2019. And really since day one, with our current gym, when
did El Cid start officially?
Actually, our first like data public was May 1st, 2017.
2017, okay.
Yeah, 2017.
And would you consider El Cid as like any relation to CrossFit City Place, or do you consider it just, no, this was a completely fresh start?
No. I mean, it's kind of a hard answer.
Yeah.
So it's yes and no. So for, all the people who aren't raving fans of me and don't know my backstory, which is probably just you and maybe my girlfriend. I used to work at a gym. Most of our staff used to work at another gym down the street. So I started as a client, then sort of like a volunteer coach, then sort of an unpaid coach for a while. As I started coaching more, I just sort of realized there were more and more things the business wasn't doing well that made my job more difficult than it should be. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about finances or charging people, this and that. Just my job as a coach was very difficult because it was so unorganized. So I didn't want that to be this case, so I just tried to make it easier for me to do my job. Eventually, I took on a little bit more of an admin role there. The owner at the time, eventually he moved to live closer to his in-laws and left me sort of like as a general manager running the gym. And that was, I mean, a huge crash course for me because I didn't really know anything. And I knew I didn't know anything, so I had to figure out a lot of things. There was a lot of things wrong, not going well with the business. So I took a step back from coaching then, started doing more of the like administrative, directing the gym, steering the ship, if you will.
Just 2016?
This is, like July of 2016 is when he sort of left and I took over, or maybe June, either way, summer. Unfortunately, due to some circumstances, rent was not paid.
You guys basically got a call.
We basically got a call and said we're
going to sell all the equipment in 24 hours or something?
Yeah, more or less. And I don't need to go into a situation where I roast my old boss. Because honestly, I still talk to him pretty frequently. It was a pretty unpleasant situation for a lot of people, but it was, I learned a lot the hard way. So essentially that gym closed down. We had some members that wanted to, they were interested in taking over the business. That didn't work out, so we started a new gym about 6 months later, 5 months, 5.5 months. So December 2016, we closed down. We opened up CrossFit El Cid in May, and then we really signed a lease for like the new spot probably a month after the old gym closed down. So during that time, I spent a lot of time learning, working on systems, like creating our onboarding processes, that sort of stuff. But we were able to start day one with 80 members. I think 50 to 60 from the old gym, and then friends of those people referred other people to sort of sign up with like a pre-sale situation.
Nice.
So,
and when you started El Cid, how much did you coach in those initial few months, and how quickly did you get down to like 0 or only a couple hours of coaching a week?
So when we first started, I was coaching, I think 5 hours a week. And then a little bit as needed. When we did big workouts and events, I would coach and lead the classes. Very quickly, I realized that one, all of my staff are better coaches than me. Not that I'm bad, I'm super great. They're just even better. They do a better job, and they were much more interested in coaching than I was. I wanted to grow the business, make sure we pay rent, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So there would be times during classes, and I realized it within like 3 weeks, where I'm thinking about why there is a towel left out right now, and if this person's going to have a bad experience, versus making sure that they're keeping their back tight when deadlifting. So I basically offered up my shift pretty quickly. Like, if anyone wants to take over this and that, I'd rather spend my time developing staff.
What about programming? Because I think those are the two roles that a lot of owners are hardest to pull themselves away from. So how quickly did you ever program, and how quickly did you get rid of that?
I've always had like a large say in program, but I've never done that head on. I'm very conservative the way that I program for athletes, clients. I coach a bunch of weightlifters, and even with them I'm conservative. If it was up to me, it'd be like an hour of like core bracing, bodybuilding, and then going for a walk in the sun. And we wouldn't probably do very well. Everyone would be healthy, but it wouldn't be a great experience for, I think, a lot of people because of my own biases. So, I took a steps back from that. Even before this gym started, at our old gym, I just sort of would be like, okay, this looks good, these repeated movements. I almost checked over it like a teacher would, and then suggest edits. So, it was the same here. Pretty quickly, I had stepped away from those sorts of things and just came into more of a director role.
Nice. I think if I were to say that, from what I've seen, if you had like a superpower in terms of your role, it would be like the system side and building some structure on the back end. I think you've done some good stuff with, like, you were the one that kind of tipped me off to some of the like email marketing stuff and lead nurturing, and you are always good about managing that one way or the other. Either you manage it yourself or you work with a company like UpLaunch to manage that for you, but you don't just hand it off. You want to make sure it's running. Would you say that's like a big strength of yours, and what things have you kind of built out structurally on the back end?
Yeah, I think so. I actually do think that probably is one of my strengths. A lot of times what'll happen for me and my process will be like, okay, this is vaguely what I want to do. So right now we're working on like doing sort of where coaches are responsible for a certain amount of clients and they get sort of like a bonus for retention. That's very vague, which is all it needs to be.
Yeah, kind of like I know Mad Lab has that structure, and it's basically just making sure they're responsible for the relationship and the retention of that relationship. Correct. And they get paid for keeping people around and also referring new people in.
Yeah, so exactly. So then my thought is, okay, well, how do I keep track of those clients? Who gets who? And I have like, in my head, I'm putting a lot of different pieces together to get to the end result. The end result is hopefully we have better retention. I'm able to reward our staff a little bit more for their work. They have more skin in the game. They're almost like running their own business inside of our business. So then what I try to do is look at worst case scenarios sometimes. Okay, what are all the things that could go wrong with this? How do I make sure that doesn't happen? And what are the step-by-step guides to make sure that happens? And a lot of times I'll like sit in silence and just like stare at my computer or a whiteboard until I have sort of an idea of where it should go, and then I try to write it out like scenario by scenario. I'm working on another project with a colleague for coaching, and we were talking about, okay, this is what we're going to create, and he's like, how are you going to create it? I'm like, I'm not sure, but I'm going to figure that out. That's not really a big deal. So then I sort of sit and go to the lab, if you will, and think of like the step-by-step process to do that. And what then I'll do is we'll enact that, and if it works terribly, I try to find out, okay, where did this go wrong? What can we change to do it better? But I think for me, like kind of creating those systems is something I do pretty well, and I probably do it slower than some people because I want to make sure it's right. I try to be pretty thorough with it.
I mean, I don't know if you necessarily do it slower. I just think that most people underestimate how much time it takes to really think through certain things. And I think that's why a lot of gym owners struggle, is they don't separate enough time in their day to do that stuff. And when they do have time to finally sit down, it's in a short window of time. And they either rush a decision, or they don't have adequate systems or processes to support that decision. And it's a tricky part about like actually being the gym owner or the manager, or the CEO, whatever you want to think about that role, because there's going to be a lot of times where you feel like you're doing nothing, but you're spending a lot of time thinking, problem solving, building out systems, thinking like worst case scenarios. And there's going to be times where it is super unproductive, and then something clicks and it becomes, a huge change.
It's funny because I'll tell people, I'm like, that's sort of the ebb and flows of my job sometimes, where sometimes if we want to, start a new program, I'm like, okay, let's start a nutrition program. We're going to do that. And then we won't start it for weeks or months possibly, because I want to make sure I know exactly how we're going to do it, how we're going to track it, how we're going to pay coaches, whatever. And that might take a while. It might take me a lot of doing nothing. Like tangibly, it looks like I'm doing nothing.
Exactly.
But I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to problem solve. That like it just takes a lot of time, and sometimes I'm hard on myself. I'm like, oh, I didn't do anything today. And if I had like a map of what I was at least thinking, I'd be like, okay, well, I realized at least these 30 things I wanted to do aren't going to work, and that is actually somewhat productive. But
it's easy, and that's why I really admire that aspect about you, because I think a lot of people will not be able to sit with that, and then they go back to coaching classes, they go back to programming, they go back to cleaning or building something. Like they go back to that thing that is very tangible, that they can see very tangible progress on, and then they don't finish the job on the thing that was the most important but required some critical thinking on.
Yeah, and for me, like, it is rewarding when we start something new and it works. And I mean, I'm pretty hard on myself, so sometimes we'll do things, I'm like, wow, this actually worked. This is awesome. My idea worked. And I mean, even like having the gym sometimes where, you know, I was like 5 or 6 months working on systems and how things were going to go. And the first 3 weeks, I'm like, oh, there's people here and they're exercising and having a good time. And it worked. This is awesome.
Yeah.
So that's really rewarding to me, but it's a very long-term payoff, I think, you know, when you can spend weeks or months working on starting a new program or systems or changing the way you do things. And all that trial and error that goes into it, and then once you see it working well and sort of flowing the way that it should, it's really rewarding to me. And I think it's rewarding too when the staff and my team are like, oh, this is working really well, it made my job easier, or I'm helping these clients better. And I'm like, okay, yeah, all those times like staring at my computer doing nothing other than thinking sort of worked out.
Nice. So a lot of the conversations we've had recently is around like either members that we're struggling with or members that we've lost or members that are upset. For us, we implemented a reservation system at our gym where people have to reserve their classes. We changed our open. I know you guys changed your open. You guys shifted to working with NC Fit for your programming. And through those things, we both saw backlash from veteran members that were unhappy about it, and we've been good, just a
good
person
sounding
sounding board for each other to kind of work through those situations. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit about, you know, how you've handled that and get through like dealing with bad members and how it's inevitable, even no matter how hard you try.
I mean, the first would be losing sleep and feeling terrible and not working out great. And then the second situation is actually usually talking to you or other people and then like, I'm not doing a terrible job. And 1, 2, 4 people out of, you know, all of our clients isn't really that big of a deal. And then repeating that to myself over and over and over and over and over again.
I remember you telling me that some of these clients expressed to you that, oh, everybody's complaining about programming. Everybody's unhappy with this element. And then when you actually looked at it, broke down the numbers, it was 4 of 200. And it's like, this is less than 2% or 2% of the membership. And it is a very tiny amount. Yeah.
And it's so funny. This brings me back to a conversation we had probably like a year and a half or 2 years ago. And you're like, oh, people are always going to complain about programming. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, all right, whatever. They're going to. But yeah, I mean, I think we were both almost in like a crisis mode, for lack of a better term, with, you know, some of those issues that we've had where people were upset about certain things. So we almost both were saying the same things to each other, and really the things that we should probably have listened to ourselves as far as, we should have been telling ourselves rather, as far as how to get through and work through some of the issues and like the distresses that we had. And I think that's where, like, you know, collaborating and talking to other people is so helpful, where you're able to take a step back and listen to somebody else's advice and hear like, okay, you're not necessarily doing anything wrong, or that it's 2 to 3 people, or, you know, sometimes I'm not very tactful. And you're like, oh, these people are complaining. I'm like, tell them to leave. Who cares?
Yeah.
You have a lot of other people. Get them out of there, dude, if they're annoying. And I should probably listen to that myself a little bit sometimes. It's easier for me to say it to you. But I mean, really, I think with any of those instances that you and I have come up with, a lot of it is just communicating to members what and why we're making changes.
Yes.
And I think sometimes it's so easy for us in like a leadership role behind the scenes. We're like, well, they can't tell why we're doing this. This is obvious.
Yeah.
We're not doing 30 snatches for time because I care about your shoulders and lower back. Like, are you serious? You don't understand that? But when you have that conversation with somebody and say that, they're like, oh, okay. Yeah, snatches usually do hurt my shoulders when I do that many. And I'm like, okay, so you just told me how terrible our programming was and how unhappy you were and you want to leave the gym, but now that I told you I don't want you to get hurt, you're happy again. Okay, I guess that makes sense. And it's just sometimes, like, I think with your check-in system and that sort of thing too, when you had those issues, it was communicating it efficiently and consistently to people. And it goes the same for coaches and that sort of thing too.
Yeah, I remember the realization that I had, I think I told you, was like, it's like, I realized that I'm not afraid to see members leave. The worst case scenario is really when a member is unhappy and they still choose to stay.
Yeah.
And actually, what I told you when I walked in today is, like, I actually think little changes in your business are a great way to kind of test the waters with people, because realistically, something like a reservation system in the grand scheme of it is such a small, insignificant change. We're only penalizing people if they reserve a full class, 35 plus people, and then they don't show up for a 35 plus person class. If they no show or forget to reserve, there's zero penalty besides a full class. So for them, it's really such a small, there's no real risk to that scenario. Yet many people still, not many, a few people still quit over that, or at least said that there was the reason. But I think a lot of those people are already unhappy, already looking for a reason to leave, and you just gave them a reason to leave. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a positive thing if those people leave, because they're dragging down others, they're infecting your community in a negative way. And you're the worst kind of client is an unhappy client that stays,
sticks around.
Versus one that actually leaves. Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, we talked about that. That was like the first thing I think we really sat down and talked about today earlier. But yeah, I mean, it's almost like people are looking for an excuse to leave sometimes, and then you change something like, okay, well, that's it. And unfortunately, sometimes you're just like, okay, bye. don't let the door hit you on the way out. But I mean, I think that's the nature of the business, really. It's easy to say, like, oh, we want every one of our members to be happy. We're a gym for everybody. And I think that's really, like, silly and naive. We can't please everybody, and I think it's very hard for us to accept that when we work as hard as we do, and we want to please everybody, or at least as many people as you can. So then when we have 2 or 4 people complaining, and you're like, oh, I'm a terrible person, I've been doing a bad job, everything I've done in the last 2.5 years is wrong, I failed my family, so on and so forth. And then you're like, oh, it's only 2 people. You know what? These people have complained about XYZ in the past. I don't think they're ever going to be happy here. So if they want to leave, let them. That's okay.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because we had that situation with a couple of members that we've had since like almost day one. And we've had life-changing transformations for some of them. And they've wanted to do different things where, most of this group wanted to do competitive sport of fitness training. They want to do weekend throwdowns every weekend. And we have never really pushed that. We've never really been in that direction. And we're a little bit further away from it than we've ever been. And I mean, I've had conversations with them like, oh, I would compete every weekend if I could. And I'm like, that's incredibly unhealthy, actually. I'm like, what kind of coach are you? And I'm like, I guess one that cares about your longevity. I don't know.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. So, and then, you know what? They left and they're not creating any other unhappiness, and they're happy at their other gym, which is awesome. I'd rather them be happy somewhere else than be unhappy here.
Yeah.
And it's not because I like hate their guts or want to tell them to go somewhere.
Well, I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I seen a lot of situations where people evolve out of our service, and I think that's perfectly fine. And I think if you try to be everything to everyone, even someone that was at one time an ideal client, they can evolve out of your service, and that's perfectly okay. And you can still have a great relationship with that person. And I think sometimes clients make it more emotional than it needs to be. Sometimes owners make it more emotional than it needs to be. But it could literally just be, my goals have kind of shifted a little bit. And I'm no longer like really focusing on this thing that is your core value, your core service.
Yeah, that is almost an exact conversation I had with a client who wanted to do more, competitive, like CrossFit for sport sort of movements more often. And I sat down with them, like, couldn't deadlift when you came in, you couldn't keep your back straight, you couldn't hinge. You do very well with all of our movements, and you want to learn other things and focus on competing. That's great. That is not a program that we offer. I don't think I can offer it. We're not going to, because that's not part of like our core values and where we want people to be. And here is gym XYZ that do that. I think that'd be a better fit for you. And it's very funny because sometimes they're like, no, but I want to do these things. I'm like, yeah, I hear you. I don't think I can help you almost. And like, no, but I want to be here. And I'm like, yeah, but I can't change all of my programming for you, and I don't think it's going to be a good fit. Like for you, it's not for me. I'm going to be here either way.
Yeah.
Telling them like, this is what's important to you, this is what's important to us. They're not the same thing anymore, and that's fine. That's okay. I think it's actually kind of a cool thing that we've had a couple people do. Come in to get fit, lose weight, learn basic movements. I mean, even beyond basic movements, and now want to do something more advanced, more competitive. It's cool for them for sure. I don't want to do that. I'm good with just squatting and deadlifting.
Yeah, same here. I mean, over time, I've gotten sort of backtracked with my approach to kind of get back to the core of it rather than trying to open up to more advanced skills and more advanced stuff. But yeah, I love it so much. The thing that sticks out to me is like, when I think about these people is like, would this person have stuck around in the environment that they want us to create today? So a lot of the people that I'm specifically thinking of, it's like, this person came in with 30 plus pounds to lose. This person came in intimidated at one point. They didn't want to do CrossFit to start. They started with our Beach Fit program for the first several months because they didn't want to do CrossFit. They were drinking a lot, they were smoking a lot, whatever it might be. And we were able to get them to this point now. How cool is that? But if we want to help the next person drop 30 pounds, stop drinking, stop smoking, eat better, we can't go this sport direction too far, because we're no longer going to have the atmosphere that's going to make that person feel welcome. And to me, that's way more important. It's like, I always want to be the atmosphere that someone who's intimidated and needs to lose 50 pounds feels comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% right. And if we changed what we offer based on what whoever was complaining the most at the time said we should do, like, there'd be no consistency, and I don't think we'd please anybody.
Yeah.
Please like one or two people per week, and that would not be fun. I mean, we're sort of the same boat where it's like, I would rather somebody come in who was very unhealthy, overweight, injuries, achy, didn't know how to eat well, and get them healthy for the rest of their life than get them to string together 5 ring muscle ups. One of those is more important to me than the other. And I think there's a lot more people that are unhealthy that need our help than people who need to be able to do a bunch of muscle ups and try to compete at sanctionals.
Yeah,
as they say now.
So let's shift gears a little bit. I wanted to talk about the weightlifting side, because I think you've done a really cool job of weaving in what I would say is more of your ultimate passion is the weightlifting side versus like the true CrossFit side. You've weaved that in without letting that affect your core service. So how do you sort of weave in that passion without it taking away and like building the business around that?
Well, it's interesting because we were sort of talking about programming being competitive. I mean, I coach a bunch of like Olympic weightlifting athletes, people that are competing at like a national championship level, at really all varying ages from like youth to masters. But then we are not doing a lot of heavy snatching and clean and jerking in our classes, which I think some people are like, oh, this is kind of ironic. And for me, I pretty quickly say like, yeah, they're competing for sport at a detriment to their health. Not that it's incredibly unhealthy,
right?
But it's, if they wanted to live a healthier lifestyle, I'd be like, yeah, you should probably not snatch 4 times a week and clean and jerk 300 pounds.
There's an assumption of risk there that they have to know about for
Correct.
taking on that activity.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times when I have those conversations with like, oh, that makes sense, and I'm like, okay, good, it makes sense to me. I'm glad I conveyed that well. So we're fortunate that we have a lot of space, so that we actually have like a separate training area for weightlifting, a much larger, cooler looking CrossFit area, which is perfectly all right. So I actually don't even remember what the actual question is.
Just kind of have it weaving in the two. I mean, you started to answer it in terms of how you separate the two in terms of like goals for your clients. Like, you don't really snatch in classes versus you snatch in there, but you've had those conversations.
Yeah,
with
and that's open to anybody. I think sometimes even in our gym, people are like, oh, what do I have to do? And I'm like, just, walk across the hallway and show up and listen for a couple hours a week. And some people ironically don't want to do that. They're like, oh, I just want to snatch in the class. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, if you come over here once or twice a week and I can help you out for sure. But you got to give me some time and consistency and listen. But we do that. I mean, like I said, it's more training for sport. Some of them are training their youth kids that train for their own sports, and we use weightlifting and other movements to get them better at that.
And you really streamline that to a certain part of your day, right? Like where it's late afternoons, early evenings, and then the rest of your first part of the day is like strictly on the business and CrossFit?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, so from, Mondays and Fridays from about 4 to 7 ish, I'm on the floor coaching weightlifting, and I'm not doing any real business admin or management type stuff other than, making sure the place doesn't burn down or answering questions for other people if I need to do anything. But I'm not like in the office per se. I'm on the floor actively coaching, working with athletes. The rest of my day is spent, doing gym things. They're all gym things, I suppose, but more towards like our actual core business, which is CrossFit. I mean, weightlifting is not a huge revenue stream for us, and I understand that, and I'm certainly okay with that, so I'm not putting all of my time into that. But it's also one of the things that it is a passion of mine, and I'd like to be able to do that more, put a little bit more time and energy into it. And my thought is always, well, if the gym as a whole is doing better, if I'm elevating staff to delegate more things to, and they're taking on more of a higher roles, then I can spend a little bit more time developing that program, working with athletes, trying to get people to the highest levels of the sport. But yeah, I mean, as far as sectioning time off, a lot of times I tell them like, yeah, you can come in whenever you want. I will literally only say hi to you probably before 4 o'clock. Yeah. And they look at me like I'm, being crazy. I'm like, no, I just have to do other things. Like I have to do my real job. And I already dedicate a lot of time to that. Saturday mornings too, I'm here. So it's a pretty large chunk of time that I dedicate to that. If I start to do that throughout the day when athletes trickle in, then, maybe payroll doesn't get done and then no one's happy.
Yeah. We'll wrap things up here quickly. I know you got to go, but in line with,
it's going to be like a 4-hour podcast. So
yeah, we can keep going. You can just cancel whatever you have the rest of the day. But within the weightlifting, I think what's cool is that, and I think a lot of gym owners can do this, is that you keep focusing on growing your core. You have this passion of yours that also has financial positive implications for the business, even though it's not massive. Yeah. But then also now you're setting aside a percentage of your time to work on a course, which could be something that allows you to make money beyond the time you put into something and be a little bit more scalable long term. And it's similar to what I've done with the Rockstar coaching course and doing a little bit of business consulting now. So what are you doing there, and what does that look like for you?
So it's funny because honestly, I may have been taking your Rockstar coaching course when I was thinking about it, and I ended up at a very short period of time doing a couple of different online courses. The Rockstar coaching course.
Procabulary.
Sick plug. Procabulary. Mike Bledsoe has his like strong coach situation, and then actually Up Launch training was all in like an online situation. And I was listening to a podcast or a business thing where somebody said something about like brick and mortar, it's hard to scale, and I'm like, yeah, it is hard to scale. Okay, and there were all these thoughts around. So at the time, for me as a business person and coach, I don't feel like I ever know enough. Ever, like I'm like, I don't know anything. So I'm like, oh, there's not a lot of courses on coaching weightlifting other than, I have an exercise science degree. I've spent countless hours interning with coaches and reading books and this and that. But I'm such a sucker for information that I'm like, I don't know why there aren't any online courses for this. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. It was a fleeting thought. And then I was talking to my buddy Danny Camargo, and I just asked him, like, have you ever considered doing that? And he's like, no, I don't know how to. And I'm like, I mean, I would figure it out if you want to do that together. And he's like, that seems like it'd be hard. I'm like, no, I don't think so. And we just started working on creating some courses and stuff like that. And the reality is that, based on how our business was doing with the gym, is I actually had a little bit more free time and energy because things were flowing smoothly and easily, and I wasn't incredibly stressed out, so I had a little bit of more free time and energy. And honestly, that was almost a selfish need to say, well, I want to learn more things, and there's not a lot of content formalized, so I'll just create it and then I'll learn it myself, and maybe it'll be a sick business. So that's kind of like how we started that situation.
Does the course have a name, and does it have an expected launch date?
So actually we have one up. So our business is the Olli Institute. We have a website, theolliinstitute.com, OLY. Instagram plug, _Olli Institute. Check it out. But we actually first started with a course on counting attempts for coaches at a weightlifting meet. It's a very niche subject, not like you would never take this course because like, I'm probably not going to coach anyone at a weightlifting meet. For people who are interested in that, there's a lot of really valuable information that if you're a newer coach, you learn the hard way, and possibly at the detriment of your athlete's performance for a long time. And there aren't a lot of meets that aren't happening every day, week, month even, so it's hard to gain that experience. We wanted to create a way for people to learn the rules, and then some strategy behind it, and then there's also some practice. So we did that in November. We're currently working on creating a snatch error correction course. So what we've done, we did a lot of filming maybe 2 weeks ago. Like 13 or 14 common errors when you see somebody snatching. And then what we'll be doing is like a huge write-up. We're gonna have technique analysis, voiceovers to talk about this is why it's wrong, this is what it should look like, these are the different cues, corrections, drills, exercises we would do to correct those things. But it's cool because it's something that I am learning a lot from. A lot of it is also reaffirming, where I'm like, oh, I probably know a little bit more than I give myself credit for. Creating something that's like scalable. I mean, I talked to my buddy Danny Camargo, who's really like the content wizard behind most of this stuff. I'm more so making sure we're all going in the right direction. Where we were chatting, and I was like, how many courses can you coach in a weekend? He's like, 1. I'm like, okay, how many people can take an online course in a weekend? He's like, I don't know, a lot. I'm like, yeah, that's the point, buddy. Imagine if you don't have to travel 30, 40 weekends out of the way. He's like, oh, that sounds great. So
yeah, he's been doing seminars forever. He's my favorite Olli coach that I've worked with. I've done a few different
I'll
seminars.
be number 2. That's fine.
Like you said, you're the man behind the camera, the
Yeah,
man
yeah.
behind the scenes. But I just think, especially for CrossFit, he has a great way, because he owned a CrossFit gym at one point.
Yeah.
He's not Olli versus CrossFit. He sees the mesh between the two, which I think is really cool, that he's not like so pigeonholed, but he knows it well. I mean, he competed at a high level. He's trained some of the best people in the world, and it's just a simple approach. I love his coaching style.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, where how can we simplify this? How can we make it digestible so that everyone can understand it, so people can take sort of a course and have a better idea of what's going on? You're not going to be an elite level coach. You're not going to get people to the Olympics, but if we can get people moving with a barbell more safely and effectively, that's great. You know, I don't want people getting hurt. And I think for me personally, the aesthetics of watching people do weightlifting at a high level, I think is like awesome to watch. So when I see it done really poorly, I'm so upset. And I'm like, all right, let's give these guys some help.
Nice.
So
cool.
yeah.
We'll wrap up there. We could definitely do a part 2 sometime, but thanks for the time, Carl.
In like 4 or 5 months next time we hang out. Cool. Thank you.